Cannons firing, muskets, smoke-filled battlefields, the deafening roar of explosions, the acrid smell of sulfur hanging heavy in the air, and the shuddering impact of projectiles against stone and steel. This wasn't just a new sound of battle. It was the sound of an entire era of warfare being born, and another being consigned to history. The simple, dark powder that made this all possible was not merely an invention. It was a catalyst that would reshape empires, redefine military strategy, and alter the very fabric of society itself. Before its widespread adoption on the battlefields of the world, warfare was a deeply personal and often chivalrous affair, dominated by the clash of swords, the thud of arrows, and the might of armored knights. The fortress, with its high stone walls and strategic moats, was the ultimate symbol of power and defense, capable of withstanding sieges for months, even years. Power was concentrated in the hands of a feudal aristocracy, a warrior class whose martial prowess, expensive armor, and lifelong training made them the undisputed masters of the battlefield. But this ancient equilibrium of power, forged over centuries, was about to be shattered by a granular mixture of saltpeter, charcoal, and sulfur. The arrival of gunpowder in Europe, trickling along the Silk Road from its origins in 9th century China, was initially met with more curiosity than military fervor. Early applications were crude and often as dangerous to the user as to the enemy. The first firearms, such as the primitive hand cannon or fire lance, were little more than metal tubes that spewed fire, smoke, and shrapnel with terrifying noise but questionable accuracy and reliability. These early devices were slow to load, prone to misfiring, and could hardly be aimed with any precision. For a time, the longbow and the crossbow, wielded by skilled archers, remained far superior in terms of range, accuracy, and rate of fire. A trained English longbowman could loose 10 to 12 arrows a minute, a feat that would remain unmatched by early firearms for centuries. Similarly, the first cannons were gargantuan, immobile beasts, more effective at instilling terror with their sound and fury than at causing strategic damage. They were difficult to transport, slow to position, and their ammunition, often simple stone balls, lacked the consistent destructive power of later projectiles. The established military order, built around the Armenite and the impregnable castle, Sahimed secure. However, relentless innovation began to unlock gunpowder's true, devastating potential. Metallurgists learned to cast stronger, more reliable cannon barrels. Alchemists and engineers refined the powder itself, creating a more potent and stable propellant known as corned gunpowder, which burned more evenly and provided greater power. The design of cannons evolved rapidly, from unwieldy bombards to more mobile field artillery. These new cannons, capable of firing heavy iron cannonballs with tremendous force, spelled doom for the traditional medieval castle. The high, thin walls that were so effective against ladders and catapults proved tragically vulnerable to artillery bombardment. A relentless pounding from a battery of cannons could reduce the strongest curtain wall to rubble in a matter of days, not months. The fall of Constantinople in 1453 is a stark testament to this new reality. The city's legendary Theodosian walls, which had repelled countless sieges for over a millennium, were systematically breached by massive cannons engineered for the Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II. The age of the impregnable fortress was over, and with it, the security of the feudal lords who hid behind their walls. Power began to shift away from the landed nobility and towards centralized monarchs and states who could afford the vast expense of casting cannons and fielding artillery trains. Simultaneously, a parallel revolution was occurring in the hands of the common soldier. The clumsy hand cannon evolved into the arquebus, and later, the more sophisticated musket. While still slow to load compared to a bow, the musket had a crucial advantage. It required far less training to use effectively. A lifetime of rigorous practice was needed to master the longbow, creating a specialized and limited class of archers. In contrast, a peasant or a city dweller could be trained to a reasonable level of proficiency with a musket in a matter of weeks. This democratization of force was a profound social and military shift. The armor that had made the knight an almost invincible force on the battlefield was rendered increasingly obsolete. An expensive, meticulously crafted suit of plate armor, the culmination of centuries of metallurgical art, could be penetrated by a single, cheap lead ball fired by a common foot soldier. The mystique and dominance of the aristocratic warrior class began to erode. Battles were no longer decided by the heroic charges of a few dozen knights, but by the disciplined volley fire of hundreds or thousands of musketeers. This shift fundamentally altered battlefield tactics. The concept of the infantry square, particularly the Spanish asterisk, tercio asterisk, emerged as the dominant formation of the 16th and 17th centuries. These formations combined dense blocks of pikemen to protect against cavalry charges with ranks of musketeers who would step forward to unleash devastating volleys of fire before retreating behind the hedge of pikes to reload. Warfare became less about individual heroism and more about collective discipline, drill, and firepower. Generals and commanders had to become logisticians and strategists, managing vast supply chains for powder and shot, and coordinating the complex movements of pike and shot formations. The battlefield became a noisier, smokier, and far more impersonal killing ground. The smoke from hundreds of muskets and cannons would often obscure the entire field, turning battles into chaotic and confusing engagements where command and control were paramount. The psychological impact was immense. The constant threat of an unseen, instantaneous death from a musket ball replaced the more intimate and comprehensible danger of a sword or a spear. The revolution in warfare driven by gunpowder also had far-reaching consequences beyond the battlefield. The immense cost of cannons, muskets, and the logistical infrastructure to support them required a level of economic and administrative organization that only centralized states could muster. This spurred the growth of national bureaucracies, taxation systems, and standing armies, laying the foundations for the modern nations. Monarchs who could effectively harness this new military technology were able to consolidate power, suppress rebellious nobles, and expand their territories. This military revolution also fueled European colonial expansion. Armed with superior firearm technology, small European forces were able to project power across the globe, conquering vast empires in the Americas, Africa, and Asia. Ships that were once primarily trading vessels became floating gun platforms, with rows of cannons that could devastate coastal cities and enemy fleets, establishing maritime dominance and securing lucrative trade routes. The sound of European cannons became a harbinger of conquest around the world. From the disciplined ranks of European infantry to the powerful broadsides of the ship, gunpowder weapons became the primary instrument of global power projection, redrawing the map of the world and creating a new global hierarchy of nations. Gunpowder revolutionized warfare.